Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the BookFest Spring 2022. My name is Jenna Busch. I'm here with Dennis E. Taylor, author of the Bobiverse books. That was a silent wave. I like that.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my internet to glitch now.
Oh, yeah. Expect many things from this. So I just want to jump right into Bobiverse stuff. How did you come up with this idea? Because I have not seen anything like this anywhere.
The Bobiverse idea itself.
Yeah.
Well, in the broadest strokes, it's based on a book by Larry Niven, A World Out of Time. Larry Niven's one of my favorite authors. I say this all the time, and it's just a fact of life. And I read A World Out of Time way back when, and I thought, I'd have liked it if it had gone this way instead of that way. And it stewed in my mind for years. And when I finally decided to sit down and start writing, this was the second book that I wrote. And I just tried, well, let's do that instead of this. And it evolved. It really evolved during the writing. There was not as much planning as I like to pretend.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because this is a complex world. This is a really interesting view of the future. And I wondered how much you actually had planned out. I mean, did you have any idea in terms of outline where this would go as a series, or if it even would be a series?
Well, I knew I had too much for one book. That was pretty obvious going in. And I had some general ideas in terms of subplots. My book preference is for books with numerous interweaving subplots that sort of come together at the end. And, I write the kind of thing that I would like to read. So that's how I wrote. A lot of the subplots, though, were just winging it. An idea would come to me, and I'd add in a chapter or two, and then it would grow and grow, and pretty soon it was a major part of the series.
As in terms of structure, when you're doing something like that, like if you've got an idea for a subplot and you're already sort of into your A storyline, do you then have to go back and sort of seed it, or do you like the idea of it just sort of popping out?
I'll go back. I do a massive amount of editing and re-editing. The thing about my books is I make a plan, I plot it out, and then it goes totally out the window as soon as I get started. The only thing I can really be sure of is the beginning and the end, and some of the things that happen in the middle. I do write chapters out of order. If I have an idea, there's somewhere in the book this is going to happen, and I'll write that chapter and I'll just put it aside, and then at the right time I'll insert it. But for the most part, the book grows from the middle out.
Oh, wow. Now, do you ever have something where you've got a chapter that you've written out of order and you really want to put it in, but you're not finding that it fits? Do you find yourself taking those things and sort of reworking them, or are you comfortable just saying, nope, this isn't happening?
Killing your darlings.
Yeah.
Is the phrase. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do it reluctantly and it hurts, but I've thrown out many a subplot and chapter that just didn't work.
Oh, so those could be like your deleted scenes. If you're doing a movie version. Do you keep those? I mean, is that something where, like, if this becomes a movie, you'd want to give that as background material?
I keep everything. I am a digital pack rat. I use I have a backup system. I have a 24 terabyte backup system. It does a backup for me every night. So I have everything I've ever had. Plus I do revision directories and stuff like that. So yeah, I can go back and find all my deleted chapters if I ever need to, or my old versions of books.
How many, and I know this is a thing that like everybody asks authors, and I mean, I've been asked this, how many different edits do you go through? Like how many different versions of a story?
Now, do you mean edits with the editor or just edits with me revamping?
I'd say both. Which one? Which one would you want to answer?
Okay, well, when I'm doing it, it's one continuous edit. I write stream of consciousness, and then every once in a while, I get a bee in my bonnet, and I go back and I make modifications, and then it's back to stream of consciousness. So there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 edits in that process before I even come up with the first draft. And of course, the first draft is always crap. So there'll be a few passes on that. When I get to the editor guy, Steve from Audible generally does my editing these days. We go through 3 to 5 passes before they get the copy editor involved.
Wow. And it's funny because when you talk to young authors, they always think it's going to be 2 drafts and that's it.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I'm curious about working with a futuristic story. When you're planning this out, like, because obviously, if you have your story in mind and then it sort of grows as you're writing it, that's one thing. But when you're talking about a future society, how do you decide about what inventions have happened, what illnesses are cured, what we're still dealing with?
I try to throw in as few inventions as possible. And the reason is because I want the reader to be able to identify with the characters in the book. And one of the things that I've found with the occasional book that I've read where they're so far in the future that you barely recognize them as human and you can't figure out the society, there's stuff that's try to imagine somebody from the 12th century being dropped into the 21st century and watching people walking around with phones and airplanes flying over. They wouldn't have any context. They would just think that they had, gone to hell or to heaven or something. So I try to keep the anachronisms to a minimum. I want people to look and act more or less like people look and act now.
That's really interesting because I find that I connect more with futuristic stories where you're still dealing with human nature. People are still people, unless they're AI. In which case they're sort of still people. So when you were thinking about the concept of artificial intelligence, what were there specific things you wanted to hit? Was it, in terms of what form a body would take or how you could still connect with emotions? Like, did you know that right from the beginning or did that sort of evolve?
I have always done a fair amount of reading on most branches of science, including artificial intelligence. Of course, being in the IT industry for most of my life, it was something that I'd naturally be interested in anyway. When I started on We Are Legion, I wanted to examine what that would mean to wake up to find that you're just a computer replica of a human being. The question of whether that's you or whether that's a copy of you or whatever, I just find that very interesting. And the wonderful thing about writing the book yourself is that you can decide how that gets answered.
Yeah, I actually wanted to hear your thoughts on AI in general and like where you see us going and what you think of that.
Well, I think we're a long way from actually producing real artificial intelligence. We've got expert systems, we've got neural nets, and those are all the beginnings of AI. The same way that a circular rock is the beginning of an airplane. It's just there's such a big gap between where we are and something that would actually be self-aware and conscious and have its own sense of self-preservation, for instance, and general knowledge acquisition, and all the things that you would need in order to be a conscious entity. We're just nowhere near that. I don't think we have the hardware basis for it yet. I don't think that our current computer system design with digital computers is at all amenable to producing it.
And then you've got, the idea of taking someone's actual consciousness and uploading it. Do you think that's a more likely scenario than just straight computer developing intelligence?
That is an excellent question. I think we will probably be able to emulate a human personality long before we'll produce an actual artificial intelligence. Because with emulating a personality, all you really need to do is, if it's simple, is produce a set of responses that would be consistent with the original individual. It doesn't necessarily even have to be actually self-aware. It could be a Chinese room. So that part, not too bad. But producing an actual AI, I think there's so much hardware and theoretical work still in our future before we get there.
And I'm curious about your thoughts on the psychology of this, because you've got Bob, you've got somebody who has this personality that sort of seems like it would work perfectly there. But have you done research into what sort of personality would be okay in a different kind of body?
I'm not sure there is any research on that. I think you can probably intuitively visualize what type of person would be okay with it and what type of person would just start running around the room waving their hands in the air and screaming. I would be fine with it. If I was to wake up and find that I was a copy of the original Dennis, I think I would be quite happy with the idea of being effectively immortal. Somebody else might just completely freak.
So you're basically volunteering for this. You all heard it here. It's going to happen.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't involve. I don't know if you've seen the series Upload.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, well, in the first episode, I don't want to be uploaded that way.
Yeah, well, that's a weird situation too, because you're paying. Everything's still dependent on money, and so.
Yeah. Well, I think that the actual upload process for the protagonist, I think that's what's called destructive copying.
Oh, yeah, that show messed me up at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah.
It's odd that you mentioned that, because I was actually going to ask you if you'd seen that, because especially once you said that you try to do as few anachronisms as possible, because that kind of feels like that same thing.
Yeah, and that show is a good example where, they have self-driving cars, big deal. They've got, obviously they've got better computer technology if they can have a virtual world like that. But most of it, you watch that show and most of it looks like now.
Yeah.
There's no, there's no interference with just absorbing the show as is. And that's why I say I like to keep the new inventions to a minimum, to whatever is necessary for the story. And everything else is just background.
Is there something that you wrote in terms of technology that you'd really like to see?
To Bobiverse. Really, I mean, if that was the only thing that came true of all of my writing, I'd be perfectly content with that.
So someone needs to get on that right now, because that would actually be really cool. One of the things I think is so cool about this is you take a character, and it's actually something we're seeing a lot with like Clone Wars and things like that with Star Wars, but you take a character and you basically got the same character, but different enough that it's a different personality. That's a complicated thing to put down on, well, I was going to say paper, but we don't really write on paper anymore. So how do you keep that straight? How did you manage that sort of delicate balance?
Well, at first, I have to admit that the idea of the different Bobs having different personalities was an afterthought. I didn't originally put it into the book. My agent suggested that it would help the conflict if the Bobs didn't always agree on everything. So different personalities, different preferences, suddenly disagreements about strategy and of course Homer and stuff like that. But yeah, it grew. It just grew out of the framework.
since you mentioned editing, one of the things that a lot of writers, particularly new writers, but definitely writers who've been around for a while, like taking criticism and having changes made to something that's like your baby. How do you process that sort of thing?
I've been in IT most of my life, and I've participated in code reviews. And if you want criticism, participate in a code review. I'm used to it. It's just business.
That's impressive. Is there ever a time where you feel like, no, I have to insist that this is the way it's going to be and I'm not changing it?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. But well, that at least is something where it's different from code reviews, because you can objectively show that a particular function either works or doesn't. But with novels, or with stories, of course, it's a lot more subjective. I have those conversations with my editor on every single book. He will say, well, this chapter or these chapters, and in fact, I'm going through that right now on Earthside, where there's a number of chapters that he's flagged and said, do we really need this? And in one set of cases, I agree with them, and I'm going to move the contents of those chapters into dialogue in other chapters, because the information still has to get out. And in other cases, I've said to him, no, this is a setup for future books in the series. I have to have that there. And he just says, okay.
Oh, see, that's nice though, when they agree with you.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I generally do nonfiction, so it makes it a little easier. But I'm one of the things with fiction that I've always been fascinated by is you create a character. You love the character. You obviously want to stay with this character for a number of books. How comfortable are you, or does it bother you at all to have terrible things happen to this creation of yours?
Well, I don't like terrible things. My books, I think, tend to be a lot less violent than most science fiction. Well, than most fiction, really. I don't like it when people get into. I don't like idiot scripts, right? I don't like it where people get into situations that any rational person would have seen coming a mile away. I don't like it when a person is hapless and incompetent at a job that they've been doing all their life and should be very competent at. I do remember reading somewhere that Kelsey Grammer, when he was making Frasier, said that one of his requirements was that both of the main characters had to be competent as psychiatrists. Otherwise, it was just a farce. So whatever their personal issues, they were good psychiatrists, or were they psychologists? I can never remember.
I watched the show. I should know this.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I write basically competent characters who aren't idiots, unless they're required to be an idiot, and they tend to avoid trouble, but trouble follows them, because otherwise you don't have a story.
Yeah. So, in terms of your process, how do you sit down to write? Like, what is your writing day like? Do you do it around other things, morning, night?
Oh, I wish I had a process. I wish I had a schedule. I call myself a semi-retired writer, and there's a reason. I would love to be able to sit down at 9 a.m. every morning and write for 4 hours, and then get up from the computer and go do other things for the rest of the day. Peter Clines, I think, actually writes on one of those walking desks.
Yes.
So he gets exercise while he's writing, and he has a schedule for it. I just don't have that. I'll have days where I'll sit down for most of the day and hammer away, and other days where I just won't do anything.
Oh, man. I don't know how you type while walking. I've spoken a book into a phone, but
yeah, I don't know that. Practice, maybe.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that because some people seem to work better with a schedule. Some people cannot do schedules, and I always sort of find it fascinating to see what people do. And what do you do in terms of distractions? Like, say you have one of those days where you're just going to sit down the whole day, or you don't even mean to sit down the whole day, but you do. How do you keep distractions away?
It has a lot to do with environment. If I can sit down on the patio, I will get a lot of work done. Sunny day, warm air, birds in the background, that kind of thing, or out on the patio up in Whistler. Those are my ideal environments, and for whatever reason, I'm able to do heads down writing. If I need a break for a few minutes, I just look up, right? But downstairs in my office here, which you see behind me, it's a little more of a struggle.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that because I know some people who have music on in the background. I couldn't. Do you ever listen to anything, or do you have noises around you when you're in your office?
I do put the TV on, and I put it on channel 733, which is nature sounds, and that's nice because it's not really in your face or in your ears. It's a background sound. It works. I can turn it down, but other than that, like I won't put on 70s or hard rock or anything like that. It's just too distracting.
Yeah, same. So, what was your process in terms of getting the first thing you wrote out there?
Well, the first thing I wrote was Outland. And when I started writing it, I didn't think I would be writing a novel or publishing it or anything. It was a bet. It was a lark. My wife just said, "Go ahead, try writing something," and I started writing. It turned into a story. I looked into self-publishing on Amazon. I self-published on Amazon, and I made coffee money. And it was just enough of a success to make me say, "I'm going to try another book." And that was We Are Legion.
And did you find it a difficult process? Because I know there's often a debate these days about, going through an agent, publishing yourself. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, it is a minefield. It really is. First off, I've seen the argument made both ways on some of the forums, the writing forums. I firmly believe that having a good agent is the best possible thing. I'm not actually traditionally published. This is hard. I don't have a publisher like Del Rey Books or Penguin or any of those traditional publishers. Audible, if anything, is my publisher because they are, they're where my manuscripts go first. They do my editing. They have a 4-month exclusivity on my books. So I'm an audio first author, if you want to look at it that way. The text versions are self-published. My agent takes care of it. He has an imprint that was originally for authors whose books have gone out of print, and his imprint would put them up on Amazon just to, eke out some extra sales. So he just used that mechanism for me.
Oh, wow. Well, Audible, actually, I have many questions about that because that's how I get books now. I mean, I used to just have stacks of them on the counter, and now I listen to them. So, how do you feel about that? Like, do you prefer that? Do you like that, or do you find that more fans listen?
Well, in terms of the fans, I'm putting out every version of my books I can. You want to buy audio? Great. You want to buy text? Great. We got hard copy? Great. That's all up to individual preference. For myself, I still prefer to read. I can read faster than I can listen. And I know you can set up the speed on Audible, but I can't really listen to it at 1.5 times normal, but I can read considerably faster than that.
I'm the same. I actually, one of the reasons I like Audible and just audiobooks in general is because I can stretch the stories out longer because I read fast. So, but you've got an incredible narrator. Like, how are you part of that? Are you part of picking the person who's reading the books, or is that something that's done for you?
Some authors can and do pick their narrators. I'm not one of them. When when I first signed up with Audible, I had some vague idea of Will Wheaton doing my books because I'd heard him do John Scalzi's books, and he did a nice job. And he did Ready Player. Did he do Ready Player
Yeah,
One?
he did.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it. But the biggest thing was he was the only narrator that I knew. Right, so it's the name you know. Um, but my editor at Audible, Steve, uh, decided that Ray Porter would be the ideal person for my books. And I'm sure he had a process for arriving at that decision. And honestly, I'm glad he did, because Ray is absolutely a major part of the reason for the success of the books.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I was always curious about that. And Audible it's interesting in that people tend to hear a narrator and then go look for all the other stuff that they've done if they like them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, and well, I mean, there's a Ray Porter fan group on Facebook, and the other narrators have fan groups as well, and with good reason. A lot of people do, in fact, look up Ray Porter and then see what books he's narrated and buy those books, because you just know that you're going to enjoy the process, regardless of content.
Totally. And this is back to the books, but you've got a lot of fun nerdy jokes and pop culture stuff that I happen to love. So, do you have favorites? Are there some that you wanted to put in that you didn't, or ones you're particularly proud of?
I put in a lot more pop culture references than actually make it to the final version. Part of that is my editor's fault, because he will say that's a little subtle. Nobody's going to get that. And most of the time I agree with them. Sometimes I dig in my heels, and sometimes I'm right.
Any in particular that you can mention?
Yes, I'm going to throw Steve under the bus here. He thought that I should take out the Skippy reference in Heaven's River, because he thought that it was too obscure and that nobody would know that I was talking about Allinson's expeditionary force. And it's turned out to be a major meme in both fan groups, and caused a lot of crossover, as a matter of fact. So it's been good for both him and I.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the idea of theocracy. And so, getting back into uploading consciousness and AI and things like that. Is that one of the biggest problems you would foresee if we are able to do something like that?
Uh, you're talking about the existence of a soul and so forth. Yeah, because it flies totally in the face of any form of religious belief in an afterlife. I mean, how do you reconcile the fact that the person's still there with the idea that they're supposed to go somewhere else? But it's not the only problem. There's also legal problems. If I die and I upload myself, do I get to keep my money?
Oh yeah.
Or does the will get executed?
Interesting.
And do I have other rights? Can I still own property? Can I vote? Do I have to pay taxes? I'm sure the answer to that last one is yes.
I probably, yeah.
Yeah. Death and taxes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but then the death, if you've gotten rid of the death part.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I guess if you could guarantee that there would only be one of the person at a time, then you could say, okay, you've got um, continuity. But that's the trouble with digital life is you can just copy it.
Yeah, you could also hack it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the other big problem. That's right.
Yeah, I also wanted to talk about the idea of writing an alien species and coming up with that.
That's hard. Well, it's hard and it's easy because you have to first decide whether alien species in general would be totally incomprehensible and utterly different from us, or whether they would tend to converge on the same general. I don't want to say body design as in Star Trek where everybody's humanoid, but you're not going to get a gas being or being made of rocks or something like that. I don't think anyway. I think generally you're going to get biological entities that behave and act and look comprehensible. They'll have fear, they'll have attachments, they'll have loyalty, they'll have jealousy, they'll have greed, because those are survival characteristics.
That's true. And I'm curious, just knowing some of the concepts you have in there, what sort of things that you read and what sort of things that you watch. Obviously upload, but what sort of leisure stuff do you take in?
One of the quite common complaints on some of the writers forums is that once you start writing, it's a lot harder to read for enjoyment or even to watch TV or movies for enjoyment, because you're much more aware of the process and you're much more aware of the problems and the strategies and stuff like that. So you're almost constantly analyzing the story instead of just sitting back and enjoying it. It's very hard to just step back. So I do actually read and watch TV a lot less than I used to, and that's unfortunate. Um, but it's also partly because I'm doing a lot more research than I used to.
Can you tell us a little bit about any research you're doing for what you have coming up?
I'm not actually doing anything specific right now because I'm sort of between books. I'm editing Earthside, which is Outland 2, and I'm starting to write preliminary notes for the 5th Bobiverse book. But I haven't nailed it down to specific plot lines yet. And once I do, I'll have to start doing research in those directions.
For the 5th book, I mean, is this something that you sort of knew was coming before, like, or while you were writing the 4th, or when did the idea for this one come?
Well, I have long since decided that I'm going to keep writing Bobiverse books as long as people keep buying Bobiverse books. So it's not like I've got an 8-story or an 8-book arc and then it's done. It's it's done when people lose interest.
So it's never done then, never.
It's never done, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I'll keep writing them until I'm dead. But I don't have a story arc as such because of that, because it's open-ended. I don't have a specific set of things that are going to happen over the next several books. I do have an idea that I've been developing for possibly a culmination of the series if it ever comes to that. But failing that, I just write a new adventure on each new book.
So if you've got this culmination in your head as you're coming up with these new storylines, does that, obviously the goalpost is moving because you're going to keep writing them, but does that end game change?
It might, but I don't know that it needs to change much, because no matter what happens in the middle, you can still have this same ultimate conclusion.
Oh, this is intriguing. Now I want to know what I know you can't tell me, but I'm sure people are going to be bugging you online about this now. But I like the idea of something being open-ended. So do you, I know you don't have a story, but are there, like, as you're writing certain ones, do you think, ooh, this character I could do something with later, or just even little moments that you're writing down somewhere for future stories?
Well, I stick stuff into the books that are setups for the future. I mean, Heaven's River, The Search for Bender, was stuck into book 2 or 3. I can't remember which one now. In Heaven's River, I stuck in a reference to flying monkeys for Howard and Bridget. So they're going to be investigating that planet in book 5. There's a reference to the Prometheus expedition, which may or may not turn into a book. It might just be a retrospective. There's Teresa from Heaven's River, who's going to be the first non-human replicant. Well, non-human, but formerly biological replicant, because of course the AI is already there.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh, see, I'm trying to, like, get info out of you now.
Yeah. And for anybody who just got hit with spoilers, I'm so sorry.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the currency of the internet these days.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do. There's so many overlapping timelines on the internet. You can't avoid it.
Do you ever find, because I mean, the stories you have are so complex and there's a lot to it. Do you ever find that the fans remember stuff that you don't remember? Like when you say, oh, I don't remember which book it was, do you find them going like, yeah, I do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There'll always be somebody for whom that particular chapter or event or whatever struck a chord, and it stays with them. And when I'm trying to vaguely remember, just who did that at what time, and they're, ooh.
So you can call them. They can be your note takers.
Yep.
So what has the fan response meant to you? Because I know this is a really important series for people.
It's mind-boggling to begin with, and very gratifying. I mean, nothing like that for an incentive to keep going.
Do you ever have you ever had a question from a fan that has really floored you, something you never thought about, or just a favorite question from a fan?
Favorite question? Nothing really clicks on that. I have had, lots of questions posted on my blog website, and a lot of them are repetitive, I guess. A lot of people asking the same question, but for the most part, it's about details about. I mean, I had somebody ask a short time ago about Bob's sex life.
Oh yeah.
I just said, Howard.
I kind of figured that would be the first question someone would ask. I'm not asking it. I'm not asking it, but I'm curious about writer's block, because there are some authors who don't believe it exists. There are some writers who have techniques that work every time. So how do you feel about it? Is there something that you do? Do you ever even get it?
I had it most of 2021.
Oh, wow.
There's a huge gap between when Heaven's River was released and when the next book that I've written is going to be released, which is Roadkill, which is this August. I think that's like a 2-year gap. And basically, I had a year there where I wasn't doing much of anything. And I think COVID probably had a lot to do with it. It just threw everything out of whack. But in terms of getting out of it, what works best for me is if I'm not feeling inspired at the moment, I just sit down and start writing. And you write crap, and at least it forms a framework that you can overlay decent writing on top of once you got the framework laid out. I have a tendency to want to write the decent stuff out of the gate, and that's not realistic.
So you said you sort of write out of order, and that you've got chapters sort of in different places. Do you find that you have sort of tentpole moments, like these are the big events, or are the big things that are going to happen, and then you have to sort of lace them together? Is one easier to do than the other?
Yeah, because I have a lot of subplots going, I tend to write the subplots individually. And one of the problems, of course, is that they aren't necessarily synchronized. So at some point, I have to take all the subplots and I have to interweave them into the main storyline. And that's usually where I'll discover that, your character left for Hoboken here, but he's still hanging around here while he's returning from Hoboken down here. And suddenly I have to start shifting the timelines to get things to synchronize. And actually, I'm having that problem with Earthside right now, where because there's a lot of backing and forthing between Lincoln and Omaha and stuff like that. And I got to make sure that everybody is actually in Lincoln when they're doing something in Lincoln, because they can't be halfway to Omaha.
Do you ever sit down and plot how long is this actually physically going to take this character to get from here to here?
I have to. One of my bugbears is timelines. So I tend to schedule things out, and how long will this take? How many days between these two events? Stuff like that. A lot of my books have dates in the subtitle, for chapter subtitle, just for that reason, so that I can keep things straight.
Oh, wow. Do you have since you mentioned the pop culture references, we were talking about that, do you have any that you want to insert that you've just sort of held back?
No, I'm kind of pretty loose with that. If I think of it, it goes in. I have a lot of movie references and stuff like that I haven't used yet, simply being an opportunity. And the one thing I don't want to do is try to force references in. I've seen fans complain that other books, and I'm not going to mention names because you don't do that, where the author wrote the chapter or the dialogue or the events in such a way as to allow that reference, and it's very forced, and you can tell. So you have to avoid that. It has to come naturally in conversation. And sadly, yes, I am the type of person for whom those kind of references come up naturally in conversation. It's really embarrassing.
Same. Absolutely same. Everything's Star Wars. I know we're going to be wrapping soon, so I would love it if you could tell us any details that you're willing to give us about your new books.
Well, the one that is coming out next this August is called Roadkill. And it's about a university dropout, a young university dropout who runs over an invisible alien and subsequently finds his spaceship and basically gets into a lot of trouble.
That's so awesome.
There will be the fate of the human race. There will be invading aliens. There will be explanations for a lot of our current sociological issues in the world. But it's all very lighthearted.
That's really cool. Anything from any of the other projects that you can leak?
Earthside, which I've mentioned I'm editing right now. That's the sequel to Outland. It's the second in this series. And obviously not the last in this series, since part of it is set up for book 3. But the university students on the alternate Earth continue to get in trouble and continue to explore and continue to find other parallel worlds, and things just get more complicated as they do.
Nice. And any little teases for future Bobiverse, since we know more is coming?
Well, Bobiverse 5 is definitely coming. Like I said, I've started doing the notes. I'm going to be covering some of the major themes from Heaven's River, because obviously a lot of stuff happened in book 4. The Skippies now have the formula for a true AI, and a planetary-sized computer AI. The Starfleet continues to be a thorn in everybody's side, and a lot of fans are wondering where Starfleet came from. Well, they'll find out. And the Bobs will start to expand the sphere of known space again.
Oh, that's so awesome. All right. Well, before we wrap, and I know this is in the chat room, but I just want to make sure that everyone has the info. Where can everybody find you online?
My blog website is dennisetayler.org. And I'm mostly on Twitter. I'm very rarely on any of the other social platforms these days.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.